Hello, LA, and welcome to the Tonight Show with Joseph Tam.
It's The Late Show with Joseph Tam, featuring guest star Mark Harold.
Tonight, we have a special guest, expert on feminist jurisprudence, Mark Harold. Mark, join us up here on stage. Mark, good to have you on the show.
Good to be here, thanks.
Mark here is an expert on feminist jurisprudence, and today he'll be here to talk to us about that. So, first, Mark, tell us a little bit about what is feminist jurisprudence.
Well, Joe, feminist jurisprudence is a legal philosophy based on the relationship between the judicial system and individual rights, gender, and sexuality. Every different subcategory of jurisprudence is based upon various questions and approaches, and there are two characteristics that are entrenched in all branches. First, feminist jurisprudence explains ways in which the law played a part in women's original lower status. Many laws still in place today were created during a time where women were deemed less than men. Second, it is devoted to changing women's status through a reworking of the law and its approach to gender. Well, Joe, we can't talk about feminist jurisprudence without mentioning patriarchy. Patriarchy is a system of relations and institutions created willingly or unwillingly to oppress the rights of women.
Well, that certainly is interesting. Well, why don't you tell me a little bit about the historical context of this so-called philosophy?
See, Joe, I'm glad you asked. It was in the 1960s that the modern feminist movement commenced. The words feminist and jurisprudence were first married together in 1978 at Harvard Law School by a group of students and professors at the time. Following that, the first notable event was when a woman called Betty Friedan created an organization called the National Organization for Women, also known as NOW. Another significant advance was the case between Roe versus Wade in the 1970s, where abortion became a fundamental constitutional right, making way for more comprehensible reproductive rights for women.
Well, that's a fun story. Well, why don't you tell me a little bit more about this philosophy of yours?
Feminist jurisprudence stresses that male written history has created a bias in the concepts of human nature, gender potential, and social arrangement. Male characteristics are presented as a norm, and female characteristics are presented as a deviation from the norm. Feminist jurisprudence really addresses issues such as employment, divorce, reproductive rights, rape, domestic violence, and sexual harassment. Further, feminist jurisprudence wishes to take a closer look at the way traditional laws and practices are structured. Believers of this philosophy also believe that laws are and were created, maybe unwillingly, to benefit the man in society and completely ignore the needs of women. And Joe, I would say that pretty much sums up the whole legal philosophy of feminist jurisprudence.
Well, Mark, you're telling me a lot about feminist jurisprudence, but do you have any evidence to back that up? I mean, tell me some of its strengths.
Oh boy, if we were to talk about strengths, we'd be here all night. Well, folks, let me just begin by saying one of the obvious strengths is that it is efficient and it is working on a large scale. There's a growing number of women going to law school in Canada and the United States, with approximately half of the lawyers entering the legal profession now being women. Also, it has brought on the creation of the Women's Court of Canada and the Canadian Journal for Law for Women.
All right. It can't just be all sunshines and rainbows. I mean, there must be some weaknesses.
So if that is true, some forms of feminism have created an ideological foundation that is profoundly anti-male. There are some extreme cases where, for example, Catherine McKinnon and Andrea Dworkin have claimed that all men are rapists. So from a neutral point of view, one could agree that comments such as those are very offensive and sexist. Folks, this is not the type of reaction or awareness that should be promoted by feminist jurisprudence.
Well, Mark, before we invited you to the show, you did mention something about bringing a small excerpt from one of your colleagues.
Well, Joe, I did in fact do my homework, and I think I've brought something here that you'll find interesting.
Well, would you mind sharing it with us?
I sure will. Now, this is from a renowned scholar called Margaret Thornton. It was a few years ago, but I do think it'll be relevant. She says, quote, The feminist movement is grounded in the idea that the lives of women and girls should not be determined solely by gender, that women and girls should be able to exercise a great deal of choice in their lives, and that they should be entitled to dignity of the person. Consequently, feminism, as we know it, inspired by a vision of the way things might be, is preeminently a logical and tolerant movement which seeks to make things better for women in all spheres of life.
And that scholar's a woman?
All
I guess that does say something about the validity of her point. Well, Mark, the real reason I asked you to come on the show is I wanted to ask you, what is the view of a leader of the feminist jurisprudence on an issue such as civil disobedience?
Well, Joseph, I assume you've heard of natural law before?
Yes, I believe so.
Well, natural law in its very essence plays a huge part in feminist jurisprudence. And so, if we feel a law is unjust, we will absolutely let the lawmakers of the country know. So with that, it has happened on many occasions that feminist jurisprudence theorists have fiercely opposed laws, therefore taking part in civil disobedience. The first noted time it happened was actually in 195 BCE, before Common Era, when a law called the Opium Law was passed, regulating how much a woman could own and what she could wear. That law was repealed after many protests, and that is the first hard evidence that we have of civil disobedience regarding feminist jurisprudence. A modern example would be in Illinois in 1980, when the National Organization for Women amassed 90,000 women to partake in a protest to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment. Further, there was the British suffragettes. You like how I said that? I'm a man of many talents. I speak many languages. They had to be taken seriously as they committed arson, detonated bombs, wrecked shops, and attached themselves to railings in a desperate attempt to show their importance to society. Eventually, though, they did get the right to vote. Canada actually had its own suffragettes, namely Emily Murphy, Irene Parlby, Nellie McClung, and Louise McKinney, to name a few.
Very compelling, Mr. Harolds. Finally, what is justice in the eye of one of the leaders in feminist jurisprudence?
Look, Joe, it is generally agreed across the community of feminist jurisprudence theorists that first, society must remove all legal restrictions that deny women the same opportunities as men. From there, they believe that positive assistance, such as affirmative action programs, for example, must be implemented and incorporated to those who have been misfortuned. With that, they would hope that for a society where, in essence, basic rights and duties are not assigned on the basis of someone's biological...
Well, Mark, it was great to have you on.
Well, yeah, it was great to be here, but let me tell you something. The tides are changing, folks. The tides are changing.
I'm Don at my own.